The cameras were rolling. The king was mid-sentence. Then a small cry cut through the studio lights. Elvis froze. Crew glanced at each other, unsure. The child's sobs grew louder. In that split second he pushed back his chair. It was 1972, in a Nashville TV studio. Before we get to what happened next, and why it still brings people to tears, make sure you stay until the end. You'll see why this single act became a global headline. The cry came again, sharper this time, cutting through the warm hum of the studio lights. It was late afternoon, 1972. Nashville, a small television station tucked between brick storefronts and faded neon. Inside, the king of rock and roll sat on a simple stool, answering a reporter's question about his upcoming tour. The cameras rolled. You could hear the faint whir of their motors over the low murmur of crew voices. A single spotlight shone down, dust motes drifting lazily in its beam. Somewhere off to the right, the air conditioner hummed, struggling against the heat of the lamps. Then a sound that didn't belong, a small wail, high and fragile, from the audience area. It wasn't a big audience, maybe 20 people, invited guests, friends of the station staff, folding chairs a little uneven on the scuffed concrete floor. And in the third row, a boy 4, maybe 5 years old, clung to his mother's arm, face wet, chest heaving. In his lap, a small teddy bear, one ear hanging by a thread. The reporter glanced toward the source of the noise, then back to Elvis, unsure whether to push on or pause. Elvis didn't hesitate. His eyes found the child immediately, not just glancing, but locking on. That subtle tilt of his head as if tuning in to the boy's distress. A quiet gesture, his left hand lifting slightly, palm out toward the camera. It wasn't dramatic, but the meaning was clear. Stop, and in that instant, everything froze. The hum of conversation cut off. The reporter's voice trailed away, one of the stagehands shifted his weight, the faint creak of his work boots echoing in the stillness. The boy's crying didn't stop. If anything, it grew louder in the silence. Elvis rose from his stool, slowly, deliberately. For a split second, you could feel the tension in the room. This was live to tape. Interviews like this were scheduled down to the minute. Breaking rhythm was rare, but here was the king, already stepping down from the small platform, his shadow stretching across the floor toward the audience. What would he do? Would he try to comfort the child himself? Would security step in? Some in the crew exchanged glances, unsure if they should intervene. The director in the control booth muttered something into his headset, but no one moved to stop Elvis. The boy kept his face buried against his mother's side, the teddy bear now damp in one corner. Elvis closed the distance, boots clicking steadily, the soft drag of a microphone cable following behind him. Every eye in the room was locked on that slow walk, and no one, not even the man asking the questions, could guess what would happen next. Because what came next would not just bend the rules of live television, it would make history. He didn't say a word, he just started walking. Elvis stepped off the low stage, the edge of his stool still spinning slightly behind him. The mic cable scraped softly along the floor, following like a tail. Each step landed with a quiet click of polished boots on smooth concrete. The audience didn't breathe. Even the reporter, still holding his question card, stood frozen. From this angle, the studio looked smaller, a patchwork of cables, taped markers on the floor. And the smell of hot equipment. In the corner, a styrofoam cup of coffee sat on a folding chair, its bitter scent mixing with the faint sweetness of hairspray drifting from the makeup table. 3 rows in, the boy's mother shifted in her seat, eyes wide, lips parting as Elvis drew closer. She adjusted her grip on her son, who clung tighter, small fingers gripping the fabric of her blouse until his knuckles whitened. The child's teddy bear, tan once, now worn thin, dangled in one hand. A dark patch marked where tears had already soaked the fabric. When Elvis reached them, he crouched. The spotlight caught on his left cuff, a sliver of white against the darker jacket. His face softened, not the broad showman's grin fans knew, but something gentler, quieter. "Hey buddy," he said, voice low enough the mics barely caught it. The boy's cries hitched, a hiccup. Then another. Witnesses recall that Elvis said something else, a short line meant only for the boy's ears. Whatever it was, it worked. The child's shoulders eased, his breathing slowing. Then in one smooth motion, Elvis reached inside his jacket pocket. His hand emerged with a scarf, pale blue, folded neatly. Without a word, he draped it gently over the boy's small shoulders. The scarf seemed to anchor him. The crying faded into soft, uneven breaths. Around them, the studio crew stayed utterly still, not a lens moved. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning, and the distant, muffled tuning of an electric guitar from somewhere offset. For a moment, Elvis just stayed there, crouched, one hand resting lightly on the scarf. His eyes didn't leave the boy's face. Then he looked up, catching the mother's gaze. He gave a small nod, as if to say, "It's okay now." One of the producers, standing just outside the frame, mouthed something to the director. The director shook his head, no interruption. Elvis rose, the pale scarf a bright stripe in the dim audience area. He turned back toward the stage. Everyone assumed he'd return to his stool in the interview. But halfway there, his gaze shifted toward the small group of musicians gathered near the corner of the set, and he gave them a look they knew well. A look that meant something's about to happen. The band wasn't scheduled to play, but when Elvis gave that nod, they didn't hesitate. In the corner, a guitarist set down his coffee, sliding the strap over his shoulder. The upright bass player adjusted his grip, and a faint shuffle of movement rippled through the small group. Elvis walked toward them, the mic cable trailing like a lifeline back to the stage. He leaned in, murmured a few words. Then with a slow tap of his boot against the floor, the first gentle chords of Love Me Tender began to fill the studio. This wasn't a concert hall. The acoustics were flat, the walls lined with dull soundproof panels. But in that moment, the room felt alive. Elvis turned back toward the boy, who still sat in his mother's lap, scarf tucked under his chin like a shield. Holding the mic, Elvis walked over and extended his free hand. The boy hesitated, then reached out, small fingers curling around Elvis. A collective hush spread over the crowd. Even the hum of the lights seemed to fade. Elvis began to sing, not the powerful stage-filling voice of an arena show, but a softer tone, every word rounded, every note meant for one listener. Love me tender, love me sweet. The boy's eyes widened, the earlier tears replaced by something else. The kind of wonder a child has when they realize a moment is meant for them alone. The audience leaned forward, as if afraid to miss a breath. A woman in the second row clasped her hands together, lips trembling. Halfway through the verse, Elvis lowered the microphone toward the boy. The child blinked, startled, then mumbled the next few words, not in rhythm, not on pitch, but with a soft bravery that made the room exhale in unison. Elvis smiled, just enough to show the corner of his teeth, and nodded in encouragement. The crowd let out a gentle laugh, the kind that rises not from humor, but from shared joy. Off to the side, the reporter stood awkwardly, his question cards now forgotten in his hand. The cameraman whispered, "Are we still rolling?" The floor director, eyes locked on the scene, gave the faintest nod. The song continued, each chord weaving the boy deeper into the center of the moment. Then as the final verse began, Elvis leaned down and whispered something only the boy could hear. The boy's eyes glistened, not with tears this time, but with something unspoken. And before the last note faded, Elvis gave the boy's hand a gentle squeeze, then glanced toward his mother. It was a signal, something was about to change. Because this wasn't just a song anymore. It was the beginning of a promise. The music faded, but Elvis didn't step away. He crouched again, back at the boy's level. The guitar's last note hung in the air, warm and lingering. A few in the audience started to clap, but it was soft, hesitant. As if they didn't want to break the spell. Elvis kept his gaze on the boy. Witnesses recall his voice dropping low, calm and steady. "You've got a seat at my shows anytime you want," he said. The boy blinked, processing the words. His small hands tightened around the pale blue scarf, now rumpled from his grip. Then Elvis reached into the inside pocket of his jacket again, not for another scarf, but for something small. A cream-colored card, edges crisp. An embossed Graceland phone number pressed into its surface. He turned it over once in his hand, then offered it to the boy's mother. "Tell them Elvis said your family," he told her, his tone firm but kind. The mother's mouth trembled as she accepted it. She looked at the card, then back at him, clearly searching for the right words. None came, she just nodded. Around them, the studio lights hummed. Somewhere backstage, a chair scraped against the floor. But in the audience, the air was. The boy leaned forward, burying his face into the scarf. The faint scent of Elvis's cologne, a mix of wood and spice, clung to the fabric. From the stage, the director gave a small wave, signaling to pick up the interview again. Elvis shook his head, slowly. "Some things are more important," he said into the mic. The words carrying easily to every corner of the room. The crew exchanged glances. This was supposed to be a short promotional piece. 15 minutes start to finish. But now, time didn't seem to matter. The mother slipped the card carefully into her purse, her fingers lingering on it for a second longer than necessary, as if to make sure it was real. Elvis gave the boy's head a gentle pat, then stood. From the back of the room, the reporter stepped forward, unsure whether to resume. Elvis smiled faintly at him, a silent reassurance. But he didn't sit back down. Instead, he took a moment to glance around the small crowd. The room had shifted. People weren't just watching Elvis Presley, the performer. They were watching a man who had chosen a child's tears over a camera's schedule. The applause began again, this time steady, warm and unhurried. In the control booth, a producer leaned toward another and whispered, "We keep every second of." No one knew yet how far this moment would travel. But in that small Nashville studio, the promise had been made. And 7 days later, it would arrive at their door in a way they never expected. 7 days after the studio moment, a cardboard box appeared on the family's front porch. It was a gray Tennessee morning, the kind where the mist hangs low over the rooftops. The boy's father had just come home from his early shift at the factory, when he spotted it. The box, sealed with heavy tape, no return address inside. He carried it inside, setting it on the worn kitchen table. The boy hovered beside him, still wearing the pale blue scarf, like armor. His mother reached for a kitchen knife to slice through the tape. Inside, nestled in crumpled brown paper, was a guitar. Not a toy, not plastic. A real child-sized acoustic guitar, its polished wood catching the morning light. The smell of fresh varnish drifted up from the case, mingling with the faint scent of cedar from the soundboard. The boy's father froze, one hand resting on the smooth neck of the instrument. He was a man of few words, but his eyes glossed as he took it in. Tucked inside the case was a folded note on simple white stationery. The handwriting was unmistakable, broad strokes, confident loops. "You'll always have a seat in the front row." Elvis, the boy's mother, read it aloud, her voice trembling halfway through. The father stepped back, swallowing hard. For years he had worked long hours, never expecting someone like Elvis Presley to know his son's name, let alone send him something this personal. The boy cradled the guitar awkwardly, his small fingers trying to press on the strings. A sound, uneven, but bright, filled the kitchen. The scarf slipped slightly from his shoulders, but he didn't notice. Word spread quickly in their small town. By the weekend, a local paper ran a short piece about the gift. The photograph showed the boy holding the guitar, scarf visible in the frame. Within days, the story was picked up by larger outlets. Soon, the clip from the studio, unedited, raw, aired nation. People wrote letters to the station, to Elvis's fan club, even to the boy's family. Some sent their own childhood instruments, saying every kid deserved a moment like his. The boy's mother kept the note in a small frame above the kitchen counter. The father, quiet as ever, began to hum, "Love Me Tender," while tinkering in the garage. Years passed, the boy grew up. The scarf eventually placed in a shadow box, the guitar strings replaced but the body untouched. Even decades later, whenever he picked up that guitar, the memory returned, of a man in a dark jacket, a pale blue scarf, and a kindness that stopped the world. 50 years later, the footage still circulates, a grainy clip that can stop a scrolling thumb in seconds. The camera angle is simple, Elvis seated, mid-interview. Then, the moment he hears the cry, everything changes. For fans who saw it in the 70s, it wasn't just an unscripted act of kindness. It was a rare glimpse behind the curtain, the human being beneath the stage light. The early 70s were loud years: stadium rock, political unrest, television variety shows stacked with choreography and glitz. Every second of airtime was scripted, timed and monetized. Breaking format meant risking the network's patience. And yet in that small Nashville studio, Elvis Presley chose not the set schedule, but the sound of a single child's distress. Viewers then didn't have the instant replay we have now. But they remembered the way he moved, steady, unhurried, without asking permission. The way the boy's small hand disappeared inside his own. The scarf, pale against a child's skin. For the crew, it was a once-in-a-career moment. Years later, some would still talk about how the room felt warmer afterward. How, for the rest of the day, even the most jaded among them couldn't help but smile. The gift of the guitar sealed it. It wasn't for the cameras, because the cameras were long gone. It was for one boy, one family, in one quiet Tennessee kitchen. But that's why the story still works, because it wasn't engineered. When the footage resurfaced decades later, uploaded by a fan who had taped the broadcast on early home video, it spread quickly. View counts climbed into the millions. Comment sections filled with personal stories. My grandmother was in the audience that day. My father met him once, said he had that same presence off stage. This made me cry. The world needs more of this. In the boy's hometown, people still ask him about it. He's a grown man now, with children of his own. The scarf hangs in his living room, framed beside a black and white still of Elvis, leaning down toward him. The guitar sits in a stand nearby, polished but unplayed, a reminder, not a relic. What happened in that studio reminds us that kindness is not measured by grand stages or perfect timing. It happens in interruptions, in the moments when we choose to stop everything for someone else. Elvis's choice that day didn't just comfort a scared child. It modeled something powerful for everyone watching, that attention is the most valuable gift we can give. And sometimes the most famous person in the room is also the most present. For fans who only knew him as a voice on the radio, or a figure on stage, the moment stripped away the distance. It made him real. The story has its skeptics. Some say Elvis was always conscious of the camera, that every move was calculated. But even those voices admit the boy's reaction, the father's tears, and the private gift afterward, couldn't have been staged without leaving a trace of artifice. There was none, and that's why it still resonates, because in a world where so much is manufactured for effect, we recognize the real thing when we see it. The king of rock and roll didn't just make music that day, he made a memory that outlived him. One scarf, one promise, one guitar. And for one boy, and millions who have watched since, a single moment that proved kindness can be louder than applause. Kindness doesn't have to be big to be legendary. If this moved you, share it with someone who believes kindness can stop a room. And in the comments tell me, when was the last time you saw someone put everything aside to help a stranger? Your story might inspire someone else to do the same.